So, got it. So, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the New York City VOAD annual meeting, and thank you for joining us. We have a few speakers today. We have Marcus Coleman from DHS. He is going to be talking about the work that he does along the lines of racial justice and equity. And we also have someone from, I believe, NYCVOAD. I'm not sure that we confirmed exactly who it will be, but we'll be talking about the status of asylum seekers, or at least the facilities and the different models and kinds that they are in. My name is Io Harrington, and of course, with my co-chair, Zach Hodgson. This is my last time co-chairing the meeting as co-chair over the past 2 years of New York City VOAD. So thank you all for elevating me to that position. It's been great. I'm not going anywhere, though. We're going to do, before we hear from our speakers, a little bit of housekeeping. So we want to just kind of officially welcome during the annual meeting some of the newer members to the board over the past year that joined us, and you already know them, of course, and that is Shana from the Rap for Bronx and Brian, longtime member, but Elevated Studio, and Farad Kadar from Siltro, and also from Yellow Boots. And we also want to read to you the results of the annual election that we just had. So the names of our members who have been elected to the board of directors for the 2023-25 term include me, Io Harrington. I represent LES Reading, John Gonzalez from CCBQ, Brian Baer from the Elevated Studio, Carol Johnson from East Harlem COAD, Reverend Jimmy Terry from Trust Ministries, and Shauna McCormick from Rap for Bronx. These names are going to join those who will be continuing to serve their term through 2024. And just for the record, they are Racine Lee Drotz from City Harvest, Angela Calabro from SBP, Dario Diaz from the American Red Cross, Lisa First, Vibrant Emotional Health, Peter Gaditis from NIDIS and New York VOAD, Farad Kadar, Siltro and Yellow Boots, Reverend Karen Hershing, Project Hospitality, Yang Lee, Buddhist Tu Chai Foundation, and Zach, of course, Hodgson, the Salvation Army. So that is your board of directors for the next year. And we are going to turn it over now to Racine, who is going to go over the survey results that we recently took. Racine, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Io. So just to give some background, some context. So given that we do not provide direct services in responding to feedback provided by our members, requesting to gain more clarity on how and when to activate during times of disasters, we created our disaster preparedness response committee, which will help serve as a resource with blurring those lines. So just to share again what this committee will be working on is, one, defining and sharing our activation process, focusing on the importance of relationship building prior to a disaster. In other words, developing and maintaining a list of contacts to remain informed on who to go to during times of need. The other piece is, in addition to developing those relationships, we'll be working with our internal members and external partners to coordinate guest speakers, trainings, and other helpful information sessions. And lastly, we'll be working on meaningful projects like our resource mapper. All to help organizations prepare for activations, or just to simply how to seek support during times of crisis. So in January, we did send out a survey to begin collecting this information from our members to develop and maintain this list and understand the work that's being done in our network currently. So we did receive some results. So we received responses from 38 members. that are doing meaningful work across the 5 boroughs. And they're providing core work in a variety of areas like education and community building, racial justice and equity, humanitarian services for incoming migrants, emergency disaster preparedness and response, mass feeding, housing, clothing, youth services, volunteering, employment services, other social services, support programs for seniors,
Oh,
children,
okay.
at-risk community,
Hi, I think I'm
long-term
on mute.
recovery.
Racine, thank you.
I'm sorry. Oh, okay. I'll continue. Long-term recovery, faith-based spiritual care services, and health medical care services, legal assistance, climate change, and more. So some of the questions I wanted to highlight some of the responses from our members. So one of the questions that we asked is, has your organization experienced or responded to a disaster in its community in the past? So of the 38 responders, 29% shared they were introduced to disasters during COVID. 21% shared they started disaster services during Hurricane Sandy. 32% shared disaster response has always been a part of their organization's core mission, while 8% shared they have never been a part of disaster response efforts before. We also asked, what hazards, man-made or natural, are of biggest concern to your organization? So respondents shared that flooding, fires, air quality, man-made cyber incidents, lack of food, health pandemic, acts of violence, structural damage, poverty, and terrorism were among the top hazards or man-made or natural concerns for their organization. Additionally, surveyors shared their list of services, projects, programs, plans, or other work their organizations have or are planning in regards to disaster preparedness, response, or long-term recovery or climate resilience. So we also asked additional questions. Does your organization have a plan in place for either staff or those you serve? 50% responded yes, 35% responded no. We asked, does your organization need further support in disaster development? 47% said yes, and 42% said no. So this is really good information for us to take back so that we can really identify who would in our network could be of best support and connect members together so that we can just make sure that all members are getting the support and services that they need or resources. We also asked them what are targeted locations that you're seeing of need. So of the 38 surveyors, they identified Howard Beach and the Rockaways, the South Bronx, Lower East Side, Staten Island, and the Lower Hudson Valley. And that the targeted populations are youth and families, multi-generational Black and Brown Afro-Latinos, Hispanic communities, Garifuna South and Central American communities, NYCHA housing locations, low and moderate income communities, and faith sectors. In addition to all of these programs, a lot of the members are also, their organizations are providing volunteer services. So that's ranging from 5 locally to 3,000 nationally volunteers per year. They're able to engage volunteers in a variety of ways, such as trainings, manuals, recognition events, social media, opportunities for personal growth, etc. So we wanted to just share this with the group to let you guys know that this committee is really trying to piece together this information. It's really an information sharing committee, and also just making sure we're pairing members with the best resources. So some next steps in the upcoming weeks, we will plan to share this information. If interested in joining this committee, all New York City VOAD member organizations, government partners, and other nonprofit, faith-based, and community-based organizations are invited. New York City VOAD membership is not required, and we encourage participation from all New York City VOAD member organizations to ensure the best results when making these connections in disaster response. We plan to meet twice a month, an hour for each session, and may require some additional time if we need to coordinate for general meetings or other activated during disaster response. So without further ado, I would like to hand this over to our co-chair, Zach, to introduce our next presenter. And thank you for your time and looking forward to working with you all.
Thanks, Racine. For those that may not know me, my name is Zach Hudson. I'm the Emergency Services Director for the Salvation Army in New York, and I get to co-chair this network with Io Harrington, which is a privilege. We are anxious to get to our special guest, but one quick thing before we get there. We do want to acknowledge that we're meeting in the midst of a context where tens of thousands of migrants have arrived in our city in the last several months. And there's a lot of information out there on what's going on for what's available for these folks. And so we've asked our partners at Emergency Management to give us an overview, at least of the housing that's being provided as folks arrive. So I'm going to introduce Chris Pagnotta, who's the Director of Human Services at New York City Emergency Management, for that overview. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Zach. Good morning, everybody. Chris Pagnotta from Emergency Management. And, I'm going to give a very high-level overview here just to control some expectations. The situation with the way the city is responding to the surge in migrants is ever evolving. I think, you'll remember it began. We noticed this surge really picking up back in April of 2022. And as it continued, Department of Homeland Services, kind of put out the alarm that like this was happening, and really got on Moya's radar, and a variety of things have happened. In terms of, what I'm talking about mostly here is housing, but there's been a multifaceted approach. We were involved in the navigation center to provide services as well for people, whether they're staying in the city's care or not staying in the city's care. But the primary focus here and the real stress on the city level has been on making sure that migrants showing up in the city do have a place to stay, and to stay off the streets. And it has been an interagency response to ensure that has evolved over time. So the first kind of phase in that, in the process of expanding the city's capacity to meet these migrants, has been DHS really adding facilities at just a frantic rate, booking out full hotels. This has downstream effects across our emergency management spectrum. Red Cross has been feeling the stress of this because a lot of the hotels that they use to house people after fires have been kind of scooped up in this program. Just a frantic effort to achieve capacity and get beds. And I'm not sure even what the total number of hotels that DHS has booked out is, but it's, it's in the scores of numbers where they're booking out the entire hotel top to bottom and putting people in. So that's been kind of one ongoing strategy the city's pursued. Another one is specific facilities dedicated towards the asylum-seeking migrant population. Primarily, that's been H&H operating these facilities we call HERCs, Humanitarian Emergency Respite and Resiliency Centers, I think the acronym is, and don't even quote me on that. But these are sites. Some of them are congregate sites where it's large rooms and a cot situation, but surrounded with casework and other support services specifically geared towards this migrant population. Some of those sites have been short term. We had the Randall's Island site, we had the Brooklyn Cruise Terminal site, which we knew was going to sunset, and others like the Roosevelt, the Watson, Candler, 99 Washington, have been longer term sites that are kind of positioned to go. And it's been, since we've had so much struggle to kind of achieve capacity and add beds to the system, we've had to kind of do a mix of these things that are short term and long term, or longer term, to meet our numbers. And ideally, we'd like to put people, in a place, provide them a shelter, and say like, all right, this is it. You're going to be here for a while, or as long as you need until you can achieve the independence to get on your own. And that's the first priority. But some of these shorter term sites have just been necessary to keep people off the streets. So we're looking for more of the long term, but in that ever evolving quest, it's, you know, more agencies have kind of gotten scooped up into the mix to try to meet the needs. So HPD is running a HERC and has another one coming on the way. And a little over a month ago, NYCVOAD was drafted into this effort as well. And we've been opening our own respite sites, really built around our coastal storm shelter system model of like, we need to set up places that are congregate facilities, to keep people off the streets. So, you know, it's a cot, it's a blanket, it's, you know, 3 meals a day, and, you know, an effort to add services along the way. It was literally just those things for the first couple days, and then we began to add other services like nursing at our sites, and looking to, you know, expand our health and medical protections. Some of these sites are, you know, since we've had such a press to get the sites we want, they have not had the amenities that we would choose, for a longer term sites. City Hall has referred to our sites as kind of, you know, use the metaphor of like a waiting room for HERCs, and we are functioning that way, where we have people come in, and then depending how long they've been tenured there and how quickly we have capacity opening up at the HERC sites, we're moving people out. And at first it was, you know, it was just a push to get people in. And now as HERC capacity is beginning to expand again, we're decompressing our system, and you know, we're very happy to be pushing people back into the HERC system where there's better amenities. For our sites, you know, some of them, it's like we have an agreement with the local park, and there's, you know, a few blocks away, there's a parks facility where people can shower, because we don't have showers on site. Other facilities, we brought showers in the form of shower trucks, which are not ideal, super expensive. But we're doing everything we can to make sure that we've got a place that can meet people's basic needs until we can get into these longer term, better facilities. And it's been wildly challenging. We're fully activated here at emergency management. It's an all hands activation, so we're not on our typical team structure. And we're rotating people in and out of this operation, trying to, you know, meet the needs, keep people from burning out, and continue to grow both in terms of the number of beds we have in the system, the number of facilities we have overall, and the amount of services we provide on site. And that's constantly evolving and constantly changing, with the goal of getting better and better services on the site, while continuing to grow. And when I say grow, I mean, we're adding every week, you know, 1 to 2 sites. So I'm going to do like a manual count on my list here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. New York City Management is currently running 9 facilities. We have a 10th on the way in the coming days. These are located throughout the 5 boroughs. And they have a range from anywhere around 220 cots to upwards of 600. And one of our sites we're looking to expand to as much as 700. So that's the broad overview. It has been a frantic pace. We're working with partners to expand these services. You know, I would acknowledge Salvation Army, who we put together a voucher program for clothing donations quite a while ago, and put them into the HERCs, and we've been modifying that so we can offer it to the clients in the New York City emergency management side as well. You know, every time we add one of these permutations of a different agency running things and then a different contractor offering services on site, it forces us to kind of go back and redo some of the agreements of like, you know, who's allowed to take this voucher, take custody of it, hand it out, so that we have parity across the board. We don't want to create a system of kind of winners and losers where people go into, you know, a site run by one agency and they get a service that we set up back in October, and the people that we set up at you know, a site run by a different agency don't get that same service. So we're really focusing on achieving parity, and with the goal of, you know, our sites that we're running at New York City at emergency management being these short-term stays. And I'm looking at a table right now as we prepare transfers today for people out of one of our sites into a HERC to say, like, are we looking at, making sure we're prioritizing the people who have been, and I'm calling it like a tenure in our system, for lack of a better term, who've been there the longest, so that we can get them to that more stable place, with the goal of, pushing our visit stay down, or duration down, and then making room for new people, but getting the people who've been in our system the longest out more quickly, so that we can get them into better services and reduce some of those inequities. So it has been wildly challenging. And I'm sorry I don't have like incredible amounts of detail around people across all the sites, but I can tell you in the last 5 or 6 weeks, we're upwards of 3,000 people in the emergency management system alone. So this is like the longest running, kind of wildest coastal storm sheltering operation we've ever run, in a way, with a lot of more amenities and kind of bells and whistles than we would normally do for coastal storm. So I'll leave it there and see if I hope that's helpful. If there's any questions.
Oh, sure. A short period for questions for Chris, if there are any. Shanna, go ahead. You'd have to come off mute. There you go. Sorry.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for the update, Chris. I just had a quick question to ask regarding what's the best route to go when a prospective site's been identified. I know there's several agencies involved in establishing the sites long-term or shorter term. And how do you determine which agency to approach? Or I don't know if there's an easy answer to that, but for instance, there's a couple of different sites, like we have a storage place. Then there's also sound stages that have become available because of the strike. I mean, there's a couple of different options, but not sure who.
Yeah, so I can definitely link folks up to the team here that's been working on identifying facilities to see what we can get in the pipeline. Let me provide an email address for you on that. Who should I work back with, Zach? Should I get back to you or Ao?
You certainly
you
can,
can-
or Shanna's email is in the chat if you want
Yeah.
to connect directly with her.
Sounds good.
So I don't see any other hands, Zach, but I have a question, Chris, and thank you for coming to speak with us today. And that is, it's so difficult to know what's going on. And in many cases, organizations want to help. In some cases, they can do things that they want to do and can't do them related to the facilities themselves. But there are different types of facilities, and there are so many agencies that have them. And if that information was just known, it would be extraordinarily helpful. Because right now, or over a period of time, Moya has been in charge of a facility. DHS is in charge of about 100 facilities right now. HH Health and Hospitals. And I don't know whether or not there are any state located and managed facilities. If our organizations could just have like a 1-pager, a 2-pager that says, this is the agency, this is the model. In other words, this is NYCVOAD, we're doing short term. This is another agency, we're doing longer term. This is another agency, and this is where wraparound services are happening. And here's a welcome center, and here are our 9 navigation centers. If we just had that information, it would be so helpful. And if those agencies would map their locations, that would also be helpful, because most of our organizations know for certain that they cannot walk in the door of these facilities and just do whatever they want. They want to work in partnership to support the work that the city is already doing. So whether it is locating, a table down the street and letting those who manage the facility tell the asylum seekers that you can go one block away and you can get clothing, or you can get this, or you can get that, or letting organizations know, if you're standing outside our door, with food to give to asylum seekers, know that there's a rule about it in this particular facility. So just basic things, because people want to help, organizations want to help. So yeah, that really is just kind of a statement. And I have a feeling that some within the city might want to know the same information.
Sure, and I think that's a useful statement. Thank you for that. So, even though it's a statement, not a question, I'll try to answer it a bit or speak to it a bit. So in terms of the agencies that are running things, I don't have a one-pager on this, but there are, to my knowledge, there are 4 agencies that are currently doing, overseeing or managing sites in terms of like shelter type facilities. Some of them called respite, some of them called shelter. But DHS traditionally owns this role in the city. H&H was kind of the next in line. HPD has the same model as H&H, these HERC sites. And then NYCVOAD is the 4th in terms of who manages the sites. A couple of the sites that NYCVOAD manages are in facilities that are owned or controlled by the state, but they're NYCVOAD managed, and managed with our contractors who are on site there. And there's a little bit of a complex web too, because the contractors that we use in many cases are under contract with H&H. But basically it's our site. So it's those are the 4, and the NYCVOAD is the shortest term of those, where they're, I think there's an active hope that we can both keep the stay length in our facilities short, as well as, when the city can finally catch up, ultimately make them short-term operations overall and close some of them at some point. We're still in a growth phase at this point, given where we are with demand for sheltering services in the city. So we're actively adding sites rather than subtracting, but we're transferring where we can. So that's the kind of the high level real overview of who's doing what. On the question of how where these facilities are, and you kind of alluded to this, right, where the access is limited. Given that these are sheltering facilities, these respite facilities, and we have intense privacy concerns for the people on site, and limited operational footprint inside, we are discouraging folks from coming and trying to provide services inside or at the door. There have been occasions where it's become publicly known where these facilities are, and then people, in the goodness of their hearts, well-meaning, have tried to do donation drives, literally at the door. It's wildly disruptive to the site, and often, it doesn't follow the best practices that we in the government and VOAD community, want to follow for providing for not just the needs of the people, but their dignity and their safety. So it can get a little chaotic with people showing up with garbage bags, which could be clothes that they loved and used in their lives, but that we can't ascertain what the safety is for them in terms of are there a bed bug issue, or and then they get left at the door. And then does the city have a responsibility to maintain them? Do we bring them inside the facility? We don't want to do that because we can't speak to where they've been, and it gets super complicated and messy very quickly. So what we encourage is that anyone that wants to work on donations, do so through the process that's been established by the Mayor's Fund, some months ago, and offer services offsite through their own facilities. We have a huge number of these migrants, but a lot of them have been in the city now, many months. And as they get acclimated, they are getting some employment, they are getting around a bit, and the needs are not, universal there. Some people are more needy than others. But to do so kind of offsite, through your own doors and through these, other programs, we the voucher model that we're doing for the clothing, because we're tapping into places that we know have vetted the, and procedures that have been longstanding, and that we can kind of meter out, on our side, to make sure that there's some equity in how much everyone gets across the board, no matter where they are. So we're really trying to follow that model and discourage people from trying to offer services at the door, or having it widespread and having other kinds of attention for these facilities where people who are, less welcoming can direct their attention at these sites.
Perfect. Thank you for that.
Yeah, thanks so much, Chris. In the midst of all the work you described, thanks for taking the time to join us and share what you're doing. I do want to acknowledge in the housing models that were explained there, one of our members, New York Disaster Interfaith Services, just launched a contract to house folks in houses of worship, following the stabilization bed model that DHS has, and they've circulated a lot of information on that. If you know a house of worship that might be able to provide that service, I'm sure they'd be interested to speak with them. Chris, I'll just say there are a couple questions in the chat. For the sake of time, we need to get to our presentation, but if someone from NYCVOAD, if you could try to give some effort to answering that, I'd appreciate it for the folks who wrote there. Our guest presenter this morning is Marcus Coleman, who is the director of the Department of Homeland Security's Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships. I won't give a long intro, but Marcus started with FEMA in 2010 and has had different positions both with FEMA and DHS since then. Spent some time in the private sector, which we'll forgive him for, but even then was working on disaster risk reduction work. Just recently in St. Louis at the National VOAD conference, Marcus's office, and really Marcus specifically, was honored as Partner of the Year. Someone we know within the government that supports the nonprofit sector on the work that we do, has spent much of his career working in advancing equity in emergency management, which we've asked him to speak to this morning because it's an important focus area of our network. So I'll turn it over to Marcus. I'll just say, as Marcus is presenting, if you have questions for Marcus, please put those in the chat so that at the end of his presentation, we have a couple minutes for a bit of a Q&A, and we'll do it that way. Okay? Thanks so much, Marcus.
Thank you all and good morning. Pleasure to meet everybody again. Good to see some of you all virtually, which I know that we were able to meet virtually and hoping to connect with folks in person in the coming weeks. So my name is Marcus Coleman, as mentioned. And what I want to do today is share a little bit of information about some of FEMA's efforts as an agency to really go head on in addressing our concerns that we're aware as it relates to equity. Hopefully, it also provides members of the New York City VOAD an opportunity to see some of the current initiatives that may be of benefit to members or communities. I want to also just acknowledge a few folks. A big thanks to the New York City VOAD leadership for keeping this community together. I know that it is you all come from a very unique context in terms of large geographic area, high population density. Literally thousands of different faith and community-based organizations. And so grateful for the intentional leadership to make sure that across all aspects of the city, folks are engaged on natural and man-made hazards. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions that we won't be able to get to today, but a few things I know for sure. Peter Gudaitis has my cell phone number directly. So if there's anything that comes up that's super urgent, we'll be able to be in contact there. And then happy, of course, in support of the leadership of New York City VOAD to have you all connected to any colleagues within the Department of Homeland Security as necessary. And I know I have many of my colleagues from FEMA Region 2 on the call today, and they continue to be the primary point of contact, I'd say, for most of the engagement with the agency. So let me get right into a presentation that talks about just some of our efforts to instill equity. So I'm going to actually, this presentation I will make available to the leadership team to share with folks. I'm not going to go through all of the slides, but it'll kind of give you a high point on how our agency is thinking about equity internally and externally, and some of the initiatives that are coming up that we are hoping can help better serve you all as you continue to help serve others. So Really quickly, equity is in our strategic plan. It is FEMA strategic goal number 1. It is a very explicit part of everything that we are doing at FEMA, and we are taking deep looks across the system. Now, clearly, FEMA is 44, soon to be 45 years old, and you don't change equity in 2 years, right? So you don't move and make a successful shift all the way towards equity. So we are definitely still on the journey, but we are doing it in partnership with a lot of different organizations, including members of the National Voluntary Organizations Active in Disasters, and taking cues where we can, learning from organizations like the New York City Voluntary Organizations Active in Disasters. A lot of what New York City VOAD is already doing is leaps and bounds ahead of a lot of other places and spaces that are looking to focus on how to bring equity into emergency management. About my office again, so I'm actually one director of 11 different centers across federal government. We have some affiliate organizations as well. And my office primarily focuses on all hazards preparedness, response, recovery. And then we have another really large focus on combating human trafficking. And just some top line things. I appreciate being a part of the annual meeting, but if there are some specific things that we can do year round, we work to help conduct in-person and virtual workshops. I know we've been a part of several NYCVOAD partner convenings as well. More than happy to be a resource to help you navigate federal resources. And then, of course, when disasters happening, being a source of information as well. I want to put in a plug before I get too deep into the equity conversation. Some of you might have seen former New York City Emergency Management Commissioner, Deanne Criswell, now currently the FEMA administrator, launched the theme for National Preparedness Month for 2023. And in many ways, this ties directly to our emphasis and focus on equity. So what we will be focused on nationally for September for National Preparedness Month is focused on making sure that we are taking some additional steps and bringing some intentionality to helping older adults prepare for disasters. When we look at the metrics, and I know that you all see this in the city, when we think about some of our older adults that might have additional health ailments, maybe you have a lot of folks that are isolated or they've aged in place, or they're in certain living conditions and situations. It may be a bit harder to keep them connected to some of the social networks and resources to help them prepare. And so our big focus for September and for the year is going to really be focused on working with the coalition of partners to think about how we help come alongside older adults and community networks and making sure that we're taking the necessary steps to support our colleagues at the state, local, tribal, territorial level to also look at different ways that we can support older adults during disasters. Our office engaged more than places of worship. I'd say a key thing to note. So we do a lot of work in a lot of different spaces. For those of you that aren't aware with our centers. And so if you're not specifically a place of worship, maybe you're a human service organization, you're a nonprofit organization, or some other institution, we work with you as well. So our road to equity actually goes back to November of 2020. And I think about equity, right? Equity requires accountability from time to time, and it requires direction from the people. And so we have a National Advisory Council at FEMA. And in November of 2020, there were several members of that council who provided a recommendation that the incoming administrator focus on equity. You see a timeline here. I won't belabor the timeline for the most part, but I think the intention that I want to make sure to just lift up is, and you already do this in New York City, right? You guys are already connected to New York City Office of Emergency Management. You're in conversations with government in different forms and ways. It's been some of that engagement that's informed many of our decisions and strategic choices that we continue to make, focusing on equity. So our strategic plan, as I mentioned, instilling equity as a foundation of emergency management is, again, a key driver for a lot of what we are doing as an agency. And this is what we mean when we talk about equity. When President Biden was sworn in, one of his first actions is he signed an executive order that defined equity explicitly for all of the federal government. This has provided some consistency for how our federal government agencies approach and think about equity, and continues to inform and influence ways that we think about, again, as we're designing programs, as we're refining programs, as we're doing things as an agency in support of our state, tribal, territorial, and non-government partners, that we do it in a thoughtful and meaningful way. Internally, so these are all these 3 documents are internal documents. We went to our employees who have various lived experiences, many of them disaster survivors, many of them practitioners in other spaces. Many of them, unfortunately, have experienced inequities in the workplace. And worked with them and invited them to help us think through how to develop some guidance, some strategic planning documents, and making sure that we are getting some proper direction to help support some of the equity initiatives within our organization. We recognize with all humility that it is not possible to have a public-facing effort that's focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion if we do not take the effort to make sure that we're taking tangible steps towards addressing some of the inequities and some of the things happening within the agency. Externally, there's a few documents that are beginning to inform and influence how we're thinking about instilling equity and helping to make our contribution for the entire emergency management discipline. I'm sure everybody has seen the statements from different organizations from a few years ago. We are doing our part to make sure that we make true to not just having those words be on paper, but bring those into action. And some of that does require laying out some plans. And so there's a few strategies that were released externally, and we're working on some specific guidance to help those that are looking to find how they can continue to build towards achieving an equitable recovery in disasters. On the White House side, so again, I recognize that many of your New York City VOAD partners are focused across different areas. Disasters may just be one of those lines of service for you. We have the White House has implemented a few executive actions, including encouraging every federal agency to develop specific equity action plans. And that's a little bit of what we'll be talking through for the remainder of my time. Again, this link will be available. You can see equity action plans for more than 50 independent agencies. And these are, again, one of the tools for accountability that we're trying to build in so people know exactly what we mean and what we're headed towards when we're talking about moving towards advancing equity. So for FEMA, we have an equity action plan that we're actually in the process of updating and revising. But this plan is one of the tools that we're using that's really focused on advancing equity in emergency management. So this is the big seven. So when we talk about our different strategies and tactics to advance equity, and it covers everything from procurement to delivery of FEMA public assistance, which includes the funding that's used to help rebuild private nonprofits and nonprofit facilities after a disaster, rethinking our role with flood insurance and financial resilience risk, and then of course, making sure that we're investing in resources to advance civil rights. But it ultimately starts with our people. And so one of the big things that we recognize and know is that all levels of leadership and all levels of decision-making, if we're going to be committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion, needs to be reflected in what the pathways are for career opportunities within the agency, how people can begin to come from the outside and bring their skills within the agency, or if they've been in the agency at a certain level, how they can get additional support to navigate and advance within the agency. So in that vein, if you have folks that are interested, we do have career opportunities available for not just folks that are mid-career, but also early career and students as well. The second, there's a lot of talk. I'm not sure how much talk there's been lately, but there is still a lot of talk about Justice 40 in the hazard mitigation space. And so what FEMA has done and what we continue to do is to identify programs that help to support the Justice 40 initiative. That is the initiative in which 40% of the community benefits should be going to a historically underserved population through any type of investment. And so there are several programs, and I know that there may be some additional work that's happening in the city directly tied to some of these initiatives, but that's one of the steps that we're taking towards equity. And then again, when we talk about equitable outcomes from disaster survivors, I'd say a very specific action that we've taken is expanding the type of documentation that's eligible for folks that are looking to apply for FEMA individual assistance. Some of you all in the city, some of you all may have family that's not in the city. That have been in situations where maybe you own a home as an heir property owner, or there's something that's been passed down from generation to generation, but you hadn't gone to the bank. And so one of the big steps that we've taken is we've expanded the ownership. So it's not solely based on, who owns the title or the deed or who has a title or the deed of the house, especially if we can prove with additional documentation that a particular individual has been living in said place for a long time. There's other steps that we're taking as we think about how we can be more equitable in disaster survivor delivery. And that includes really looking and taking a hard look at our disaster case management program implementation and what we should be doing and thinking about in support of our states and localities to provide a program that really not only centers the needs of people, but is suited best to make sure that our state and local partners are able to work with the non-government organizations or other organizations appropriately to think about disaster case management. A big one that I want to share as well, again, for private nonprofits, I hope you all don't need it, but if you do, One of the big things that we know also is that FEMA public assistance has largely been inequitable because the way that it was designed is it wasn't designed initially for some of the applications that it has now. FEMA public assistance, for those that don't know, I know some of you might be very intimately aware with the different types of categories, but there are several categories that fund things like mass care emergency services. And so it provides reimbursable funds to do some of those emergency services, but there's also reimbursable aspects to help fund, again, damaged private nonprofits that might have experienced damage from a natural hazard or natural disaster, and then helping them rebuild. One of the challenges is that the threshold for those projects up until recently was about $150,000, which is not a lot of money. And it's a very laborious process. So what we've done as an agency is we've raised the small project threshold to really minimize and streamline the amount of paperwork and process future private nonprofits have to go through to repair their facilities. To that end, we have a number of tools and resources that we are encouraging organizations to get familiar with today, including we've developed a specific guide through our National Mass Care Strategy team. There may be several members of the NYCVOAD that were part of that effort on how to develop formal agreements to provide mass care services. So here we're talking about sheltering, feeding, other things of that nature. And so that is one of many resources that we have developed with our colleagues at the Small Business Administration, National VOAD, National Voluntary Organizations, and others to really think about how we engage in public assistance. Last piece, and I know that this is very resonant for folks, is insurance and just really rethinking. We know that there's a lot of conversation and a lot of changes that need to continue to be made towards the change in how we deliver and support flood insurance. There's been, of course, different impacts as we've continued to try to really match insurance rates with actual risk. But one of the key things that we're looking for to make sure that we're addressing equity is taking the voice of consumers or people who are otherwise engaged with not just flood insurance, but also taking some specific steps to help mitigate flooding in communities as well. Some key things that we can think about for equitable community engagement. Again, a lot of what I've seen from the New York City VOAD in terms of the resources you have available, the pledges, you all are doing many of the things and modeling many of the things that I think more emergency management entities at the state VOAD level or otherwise should think about in terms of just how to make sure that there's some practical, actionable on-ramps and off-ramps for people that want to get involved in equity. But these are some of the questions that we're asking and continuing to use as we continue to assess our community engagement posture across the enterprise. So of course, we have our FEMA voluntary agency liaisons who do wonderful work, but we have a number of other titles within the agency that provide services for disaster preparedness, mitigation, and the like. Cultural humility is something that we are continuing to strive for as an agency. I'd say where we have the most cultural humility right now is honestly around safety and security for places of worship. We recognize, right, that the increased attacks against places of worship and other sacred and community spaces continues to increase and is on the rise. And so we're bringing that same equity lens, not just to some of our natural disaster work, but really thinking about how we can engage around providing support to those organizations or those people that may not be as well resourced or may not know what resources are available. From the nonprofit security grant program to the targeted violence and terrorism prevention grant program to several initiatives that the secretary will now be implementing at the direction or with some of the recommendations from the DHS Faith-Based Security Advisory Council. We want to make sure that we continue to take a culturally humble posture on how we're thinking about addressing and solving some of the challenges for the day. I'm going to stop sharing there and see if there are any initial questions or any questions for me. But I just wanted to highlight some of the practical ways that we're looking at trying to instill equity in emergency management. Hopefully it gives you some things to think about. As I mentioned, a lot of what I've seen from New York City VOAD definitely serves as a model for how we bring more equitable engagement from the NGO coordination side, and looking forward to finding some additional opportunities to connect with you all.
Marcus, thanks so much. And thanks for the kind words along the way there about our network.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I got a question from Lucy that I can answer specifically. So glad you asked about extreme heat. So FEMA Administrator Criswell has been very committed to making sure that we are taking every action we can as an agency to provide support and guidance around extreme heat. We actually just conducted the first National Heat Summit in Chicago in May. And the reason why we did it is at the time that we did that, there was about 30 years from the big massive heat stroke that happened that killed multiple people in the city of Chicago. So FEMA as an agency is taking a very forward-leaning posture, particularly on making sure people are aware of the different steps that they can take to mitigate against extreme heat awareness. I can say for the administrator, it's actually one of the hazards that's a top priority for her to focus on. And it actually connects right back to our concern around older adults and why we're really focused on making sure that we're caring for our most vulnerable. We know that extreme heat provides a lot of disproportionate impacts to a lot of different people in a lot of different ways. And so that is something that we are committed to, and happy to share some additional information, not just the ready.gov resources, but provide some of the specific policy actions that we're looking at alongside our other interagency colleagues on how we continue to address what we know is going to continue to be a high impact crisis of extreme heat.
Any other quick questions for Marcus? Again, Marcus, thanks so much for committing the time.
Absolutely.
Network and your support of equity in emergency management throughout your career. We do appreciate it.
No, thank you. I'd like to end with the request, and I think again, some of this is something that we need to be thinking more about as a federal agency. Now, granted, we take the lead from locals, and so if there's opportunities that we can help uplift the local model of New York City VOAD, some of the things that you're doing, we'd love to do that to really share it and really encourage some lesson learned collaboration at that local level in terms of how we really think about it, addressing some of these things together. I will be able to share a modified version of the deck with everybody. There's a lot of other goodies at the end of the presentation in the PowerPoint slide. So Zach, I'll send that over to you for folks. And then again, if there's any specific topic that we can be helpful to do a deeper dive on, I know I cut across a lot of different areas today. Happy to come back at the appropriate time and provide that additional support alongside my colleagues, Race Hodges, and some of the other folks in the Val shop in Region 2.
Excellent. Thanks so much.
Yeah, I also want to thank you on behalf of New York City VOAD, Marcus. Great presentation and good information that I'm positive many of our organizations will be able to benefit from. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Zach, I don't know if we have any other business.
Well, yeah, I'll just say, as we close up this meeting, some thank yous to some people that I think need to be thanked. One, Io. For the last 2 years, I've had a chance to be co-chair with Io of our board of directors, which has been an education for me. Learning.
I don't know what that means.
I'm getting there. Learning from her years of experience in organizing and her passion for her community has been evident throughout. So I say thank you. Thank you for weekly Monday meetings where I feel like more than a work relationship was formed, a friendship was formed. I'm grateful for that.
Absolutely.
I'll just also thanks to Ellen Granger, who for the last 2 years has been the secretary of our board of directors, and has done that well and kept us in line with a lot of the administrative tasks that a network without a staff takes on. So we're appreciative to Ellen for her work as secretary, her work in the membership committee, among other supports. And then our other board member who is rotating out is Julianne Ricciardi. I think I'm saying her married name correctly. Forgive me if I'm not.
Riccardi.
Riccardi. I'll get to it. I'm so sorry. I think Julianne has been a part of New York City VOAD since 1992, and VOAD didn't even start in New York City till 97. But
Not true.
I'll just say a huge thank you to Julianne for all that she's done for the network, for co-chairing the board of directors through COVID, which was, as you might imagine, a hectic time to do that. And leading our DCM committee, leading our membership committee often over that time, being a key part of the New York City Disaster Network, leading disaster case management programs. She's sitting in the Red Cross office because she's leading the Asylum Seeker Resource Navigation Center. Her contribution to the city is pretty impressive. So I just say thank you for your years of service to New York City VOAD. That's where we'll end today. Thanks so much.
Well,
Go ahead.
well, let's also thank Marcus for his
Oh yeah, of course.
great presentation, as well as Chris and Racine. Thank you for all of the work that you put into doing the survey and providing us with the results. Apologies for the glitch when I interrupted you, had a little tech situation. And Zach, I want to thank you also. I agree with your words wholeheartedly. Although I will not be co-chair going forward, we will be friends and colleagues forevermore. And thank you to all of you for joining us today. And the new board is going to be meeting very shortly. And we will let you know who the new officers are, and we will be continuing our work. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending today's meeting.
If I can ask the board of directors to just stay on this link, we won't go anywhere else, but everyone else, thanks so much for joining.